Hi everyone! So this week we're going to be reading The Case of the Gypsy Goodbye by Nancy Springer. And if you don't know, this is a part of the Enola Holmes mystery series. Unfortunately, this is the last book in this series because I only have the last one. But the first one, in case you want to read it, is The Case of the Missing Marquess. And this movie was adapted recently on Netflix, and it is very interesting. So if you have not read that, watch that, then I would strongly suggest reading the book before watching the movie because, duh, doesn't everybody do that? Just me? Okay, but it's the best way. Anyway, so we're going to read the blurb. As Enola searches for the missing Lady Blancheford del Campo, she discovers that her brother Sherlock is just as diligently searching for Enola herself, and this time he really needs to catch her. He is in possession of a most peculiar package, a message from their long-lost mother that only Enola can decipher. Sherlock, along with their fastidious brother Mycroft, must follow Enola into the reeking tunnels of London's dark underbelly as they solve a triple mystery. What has happened to their mother? And to Lady Blancheford? And what does either have to do with Mycroft, who holds Enola's future in his ever so proper hands? No one, not even Sherlock, is left unchanged or unsurprised in this brilliant conclusion to the Enola Holmes mystery series. I'm going to read the prologue because I don't want to spoil anything for you, and yeah, okay, so here we go. July 1889. Mr. Sherlock, I'm that glad to see you. I am, and that gladly obliged. Miss Lane, faithful Holmes family servant, who has known the great detective since he was a boy in short pants, cannot keep the quaver out of her voice or the tears out of her dim old eyes. That obliged for you for coming. Nonsense. Shrinking, as usual, from any display of emotion, Sherlock Holmes studies the dark woodwork of Ferndale Hall. I welcome the opportunity to visit my ancestral home. Dressed in summertime country attire, beige linen suit, lightweight tan kidskin boots and gloves, deerstalk or cap, he lays the gloves and hat on the parlor table as well as his stick and proceeds at once to business. Sorry, my cat is meowing. I'll take care of that. Okay, I'm back, and I've got the cat in here with me. Okay, sorry for that. Let's move on. He lays the gloves and the hat on the parlor table, as well as his stick, and proceeds at once to business. Mr. Lane's telegram was rather enigmatic. Pray, what is so odd about this package you hesitate to open? Before she can answer, into the parlor hurries her husband, the white-haired butler, with considerably less than his usual dignity. Mr. Sherlock, how good of you! And as much the same prattle must be go on through all over again. Delight to my old eyes. So very kind of you. Very warm day, might I presume, sir, to offer you a seat outside? So Sherlock Holmes is considerably settled on the shady porch, where breezes mitigate the heat, and Miss Lane is offering iced lemonade and macaroons, before Holmes succeeds in addressing business once more. Lane, he asks the venerable butler, what exactly alarms you and Mrs. Lane about this package you've recently received? Well trained by decades of sorting out household disorder, Lane answers methodically. First and foremost, Mr. Sherlock, the way it came in the middle of the night, and we don't know who left it there. For the first time, looking less than bored, the great detective leans forward in his cushioned wicker chair. Left it where? At the kitchen door. We wouldn't have found it till morning if it were not for Reginald. The shaggy collie dog, who is lying flat on his side near by, raises his blunt head when he hears his name. We've been letting him sleep indoors, explains Mrs. Lane, as she settles her amplitude in another chair, being that he's getting along in years, like us. Reginald lays his head down again and thumps his furry tail against the floorboards of the porch. He barked, I suppose? Sherlock Holmes is growing impatient. Oh, he barked like a tiger, he did. Miss Lane nods emphatically. But even so, I don't suppose we would have heard him if it were not that I have been sleeping in the library on the davenport, begging your pardon, Mr. Sherlock, because the stairs plague my knees so. But I was in our proper quarters, says Lane with emphasis, and I knew nothing of the matter until Mrs. Lane summoned me with the bell. Leaping at the kitchen door and barking like a lion, he was, presuming Miss Lane refers to the dog. Her excited comments quite contrast with her husband's careful report, especially given that neither tigers nor lions bark. I was afraid to do a thing until Mr. Lane came down. Sherlock Holmes leans back in his chair with aquiline features of resuming their usual expression of disappointment with the folly of humankind. So when you eventually investigated, you found a parcel, but no sign of the mysterious person or persons who had left it there at what time was it? Lane answers, 23 of Thursday morning, or thereabouts, Mr. Sherlock. I went and hunted a bit outside, but it was a dark, cloudy lake, and nothing to be seen. Of course. So you brought the package inside, but you did not open it. Why not? Not for us to presume, Mr. Sherlock. Also, the parcel itself is peculiar in several ways, rather difficult to explain. It appears that Lane is going to attempt to explain it anyway, but Sherlock Holmes raises a commanding hand to stop him. I will rely on my own impressions. Kindly bring me this mysterious parcel. Not so much a parcel as a flat, oversized envelope made of heavy brown paper glued together. It is so lightweight that there seems to be nothing inside it. The inscriptions upon it, however, cause even Sherlock Holmes to stare. Every inch of the envelope's face is covered with crude ornamentation done in black. All four sides of the rectangle are heavily bordered with lines that include zigzags, spirals, and serpentines, whilst diagonally across the quarters almond and circle designs peer like primitive eyes, heavily outlined. "Give me the willies, they do," says Mrs. Lane of these, crossing herself. "Very likely they are meant to do so. But who?" Sherlock Holmes lets the question die on his lips as he studies the other markings on the envelope. Crude drawings of birds, snakes, arrows, and the signs of the zodiac, stars, crescent moons, and sunbursts fill every inch of the paper as if afraid to let anything else in, except a large circle centered upon the envelope. Forbiddingly bordered by rows of crisscross lines, this space at first appears to be blank. But Sherlock Holmes, who has taken out his magnifying lens to study the envelope inch by inch, focuses upon this central area with an intensity remarkable even for him. After several moments, he lays the magnifying lens down, apparently unaware that he has placed it upon the plate of macaroons, and sits with the envelope in his lap, staring at the oak woods of Ferndale in the distance. Lane and Mrs. Lane glance at each other. Neither says a word. In the silence, Reginald Colley can be heard snoring. Sherlock Holmes blinks, looking at the sleeping dog, then turns to the butler and his wife. "Did either of you," he asks, "observe the pencil drawing?" Oddly formal, even cautious, Lane responds, "Yes, sir, we did." "My old eyes missed it entirely," says Mrs. Lane, as if confessing to a sin, "until Mr. Lane showed it to me in the morning light. It's hard to see on the brown paper. I imagine it was much easier to see before someone put all this crude charcoal elaboration around it." "Charcoal?" exclaimed both butler and cook. "Unmistakably. Upon close inspection one can see the granulation and the smears. Charcoal powder has almost obliterated the drawing, which was, I'm sure, done first. As for the drawing, what do you make of it?" Lane and Mrs. Lane exchange an uneasy look before Lane answers. "A very lovely, delicate drawing of a flower, a chrysanthemum," interjects Sherlock very harshly, "amidst a wreath of greenery." "Ivy," says Sherlock even more curtly. "Would either of you happen to recognize the style of the artist?" Silence. Both Lanes look distinctly unhappy. "Well," says Mrs. Lane finally, "it does remind me of—" But of what, she seems unable to mutter. "It's hardly our place to say, Mr. Sherlock," pleads Lane. "Oh, come." Sherlock's tone exhibits a highly volatile frame of mind. "Both of you know as well as I do that that picture was penciled by my mother." He is speaking of Lady Eudora Verney Holmes, who has been missing now for nearly a year. Though no foul play is suspected, it appears that the elderly eccentric has simply run away. And shortly after she ran away, so did her younger daughter, Enola Eudora Hadassah Holmes, 14 years of age. A considerable pause ensues before Miss Lane asks timidly, "Mr. Sherlock, do you ever hear anything of Lady Holmes or Miss Enola?" Ah! If the great detective feels an odd constellation of commotions upon hearing his sister's name, none of them showed on his hawk-featured face. "Yes, I have encountered Enola several times in London, although never to my satisfaction. But she is well? She is outrageously well. At first, she appeared to be in cahoots with her mother, communicating via coded messages in the personal columns of the Pall Mall Gazette. Mrs. Lane looks at Lane, who clears his throat before venturing. You broke the code? Several codes. Of course I broke them. That is all except one, of which I can make nothing. This admission sharpens the great detective's tone. I can, however, assert unequivocally that my mother's code name is Chrysanthemum, and my sister's code name is Ivy. With a pointing fingertip, he taps a faint pencil drawing on the envelope in his lap. Both Lane and Mrs. Lane gasp so sharply that Reginald collie forsakes sleep, rising to stand on four white paws with his intelligent head on alert, furry ears up, and nose working. Reginald, Sherlock addresses the dog as seriously as if he were explaining a case to Watson. For months there has been no words of any kind from Lady Holmes. Why now does it come in this form? His slender fingers perform a muted drum roll on the brown paper packet. And what is inside of it? Lane offers. Shall I fetch a letter knife, sir? No, I cannot open it. A gentleman would not dream of prying into someone else's mail. It is intended for Enola. Sherlock Holmes pockets his magnifying lens and arises on the alert, rather like the dog at his side. He is all sleuth-hound catching scent. I shall take it back to London with me and deliver it to her. Lane and Mrs. Lane, also on their feet, stare at him. The butler voices their doubt. But, Mr. Sherlock, do you know how to find her? Yes. With a keen glint in his eyes, the detective nearly smiles. Yes, I believe I do. And that is going to be the end of today's story. I hope that you will keep this in mind. As I said before, I think I said before, this is a lot like Nancy Drew for those of you who grew up reading those books. But I personally think it's more interesting because it has like characters from history, like the obviously like mystery characters from history embedded in it. And it's very interesting to me. I haven't watched the movie. I'll have to go watch the movie, but yeah. So I'll see you next week. I am currently having a hard time because I have a cat on my lap. His name is Blooper. I have two cats. One is named Tigger and one is named Blooper. And Blooper's on my lap right now, so he's purring. So goodbye.